Building's not easy. It took a lot of hard work, a bunch of very smart teammates. It's very similar. It's not easy. It's really hard. We're building the capacity to be able to give away this money.
There is a garage in Leicester, England, and inside that garage sits one of the most controversial cars in the world right now. A Bugatti Chiron per Sport, one of only 60 ever made, that a mechanic named Mat Armstrong pulled apart, rebuilt, and started, despite every effort from one of the most powerful automotive brands on the planet to stop him. And now, the two biggest streaming giants in the world are locked in a bidding war over his story. Amazon's CEO reportedly wants to outbid Netflix entirely. Bugatti is navigating a corporate meltdown, and Mat Armstrong is still in his garage, camera rolling, completely unbothered. To understand why any of this matters, you have to understand who Mat Armstrong actually is, because this story did not begin with a Bugatti. It began with a broken shoulder and a 600-pound Audi. Mat Armstrong did not grow up dreaming of YouTube. He grew up in a household built around engine. His father Tony ran a garage, and from the time Mat was old enough to hold a spanner, he was learning the language of cars the only way that actually worked, with his hands. But Mat did not go straight into mechanic. He went sideways, chasing BMX, riding at an international level, riding for Mad Gear Pro, competing across Europe and the Middle East, building something real over 6 years of training and dedication. By 2008, he was competing at the BMX World Championships in Germany. He went up for a 720 tail whip during his qualifying run. He came down wrong. His shoulder dislocated on impact. He still qualified, but he could not compete in the finals. And that shoulder never fully healed. It would dislocate randomly, even in sleep, for years afterward. A career built over 6 years was gone in a single moment, and Mat was in his early 20s with no obvious path forward. So he did what made the most sense to him. He went back to the garage. He delivered food at night. He worked at Halford's during the day. He bartended when he needed extra cash. None of it was the plan. It was surviving while something else slowly took shape. Back in April 2013, Mat had started a YouTube channel originally intended for BMX content. When the BMX career ended, he turned the camera toward the garage instead. The moment that changed everything came when his girlfriend Hannah's Audi TT was badly damaged in a crash. Rather than write the car off, Mat bought it back from the insurer for £600, rebuilt it himself, and documented every single step on camera. That video did something his BMX content had never managed. Kept people watching all the way to the end. They wanted to know if he was going to pull it off. Mat noticed he never made a video any other way again. From that 600-pound Audi, the project grew larger. A Maserati, a Rolls-Royce, each one more ambitious than the last. Each one filmed with complete honesty. The mistake, the setback, the cost, the moments where it genuinely looked like the project might fail. The Maserati crossed 1 million views. The Rolls-Royce crossed 2 million. The audience that gathered was not just car enthusiasts. It was anyone who had ever watched someone attempt something difficult and felt compelled to find out whether they succeeded. The builds were never really about the cars. They were about whether the man in the garage was going to pull it off. That formula, built over years of patience and consistency, is what created a platform worth fighting over. And by October 2025, that platform had grown into something Mat had never entirely planned for. Then the phone call from Miami came. The car sitting in a Copart auction lot in Miami was a Bugatti Chiron per Sport, one of 60 ever produced, a salvage title, a crumpled front end, a repair estimate that came in at $1.7 million before the official Bugatti network walked away from it entirely. The car had originally belonged to Miami-based content creator Alex Gonzalez, who had been involved in a serious accident that destroyed the front end, deployed the airbags, and shattered the iconic horseshoe grille. Bugatti's own assessment produced a number nobody wanted to pay. The car was given a salvage title and sent to auction. Alex bought it back for around $1.9 million because he believed it could be saved, and he knew exactly who to call. Mat flew to Miami. What he found when he looked at the car in person was worse in some places and more manageable in others than he had expected. The structural damage was serious. The transmission had taken a significant hit. The front end needed a complete rebuild. Several systems throughout the car had never been serviced outside of Bugatti's own factory in Molsheim, France. This was not going to be straightforward, but Mat had looked at difficult problems before. He said yes. That is when Bugatti made its move. The manufacturer locked the VIN. Using its global supply chain, Bugatti effectively shut down the ability to source a official parts for the car. No official reason beyond safety concerns was given publicly. Mat's response in front of the camera was measured. He said he understood. He said he respected the manufacturer's position. But what Bugatti had actually done, whether they understood it or not, was guarantee an outcome they almost certainly had not intended. With no official parts available, Mat had no choice but to open the car up in front of a camera and show the world exactly what was inside. What he found was not what anyone expected from a $4 to $6 million hypercar. The accelerator pedal in a Bugatti Chiron Per Sport, the component directly connected to 1,500 horsepower, the single point of contact between the driver's foot and an engine of extraordinary complexity, was made of molded plastic, the kind of plastic you might find in a family saloon. Not billet aluminum, not carbon fiber, not any exotic aerospace material. Molded plastic in a $4 million car. That discovery alone would have been enough to generate significant attention. But it was not the only one. When the team needed to replace the deployed airbags and could not source official Bugatti components because of the locked VIN, they began investigating alternatives. What they found was that airbags from an Audi A3, a car worth roughly £40,000, were not just compatible with the Chiron Per Sport. They fitted as if they had been designed specifically for it, because in a meaningful sense they had been. Bugatti had been owned by the Volkswagen Group since 1998, which means the Chiron was developed within the same engineering ecosystem that produced Audi, Volkswagen, and other volume brands across the group. Platform sharing, component sharing, and supplier overlap are standard practice across automotive groups worldwide. But nobody puts that information in the brochure for a $6 million hypercar. Mat pointed the camera at the parts and kept building. 10 million viewers watched a Bugatti airbag get swapped for an Audi A3 component and drew their own conclusion. At this point, the CEO of Bugatti Rimac, Mat Rimac, stepped into the conversation personally. He posted a video on Instagram addressing Mat directly, explaining that the gearbox housing had sustained serious damage, that the carbon monocoque had taken structural stress, and that cutting corners on a car of this complexity could have catastrophic consequences. He noted that only a handful of facilities in the entire world had the equipment and the expertise to split the car safely and perform the repairs correctly. His message was measured and technically credible. But the fact that the CEO of one of the world's most exclusive automotive brands had decided to personally respond to a YouTube channel communicated something clearly. Something had genuinely rattled them. Communications departments handle routine problems. CEOs respond personally when the problem is not routine. Meanwhile, inside the workshop, the rebuild had hit the wall that Mat Rimac had specifically warned about. The transmission damage had driven the engine forward and sideways with enough force to crack the cast aluminum engine mount bracket, the component that holds the entire powertrain in precise alignment. Accessing it meant splitting the car, separating the front section from the rear drivetrain module. Mat had publicly stated that only 2 facilities in the world could do this safely. Mat filmed the whole thing and started anyway. What nobody anticipated, including perhaps Mat himself, was that the modular architecture of the Chiron made the split more achievable than the public statements had suggested. Disconnecting battery terminals, coolant lines, electrical looms, fuel lines, methodical, careful, step by step. And then, with precise patience, the 2 halves of the Chiron separated on camera in front of millions of people who were not supposed to see it. What came next required a specialist. His name was Bob. He worked at a machine shop with no social media presence and no YouTube channel, just a fabricator who was exceptionally good at his work. Bob 3D scanned the broken engine mount bracket, converted it into a CAD model, and CNC machined a replacement from solid aluminum with no factory drawing and no clean original to reference. The 10 radiators were built from scratch because none could be sourced. A custom front crash bar was fabricated in 60 hours and bolted to the chassis legs as if it had always been there. Mat and his team put the 2 halves of the car back together. 14 titanium bolts front to rear. And then came the moment of reckoning. The engine turned over, caught, and fired. The car that Bugatti had declared impossible to rebuild outside of their own factory was running in a private workshop on custom radiators, airbags from an Audi A3, and an exhaust built by Valvetronic because the original had been destroyed. A few weeks later, Mat drove it. The camera caught all of it. While that moment was unfolding in the workshop, something else was happening in a series of boardrooms that had nothing to do with Mat and everything to do with Bugatti's future. In April 2026, Porsche announced that it was selling its entire 45% stake in Bugatti Rimac, handing the brand to a New York-based investment consortium led by HOF Capital, with Blue 5 Capital as the largest investor. The Volkswagen Group's involvement in Bugatti, which had begun in 1998, was over. Porsche's operating profit had collapsed by 93% in a single year, dropping from €5.64 billion in 2024 to €410 million in 2025. Weakening demand in China, stalling EV momentum, and margin pressures that had been building for years forced the company to evaluate every asset on the balance sheet. Bugatti was not core business anymore. Consider the timing carefully. On one side, a content creator from Leicester publicly exposing the shared component supply chain between a $6 million Bugatti and mass-market Volkswagen Group cars, broadcasting it to 10 million subscribers, with the CEO of Bugatti personally compelled to respond. On the other side, a 93% profit collapse and a full corporate exit from the brand announced within the same window. The structural causes of Porsche's financial difficulties were global and built up long before Matt picked up a spanner in Miami. But the optics, the question of what the Bugatti name is actually worth when someone starts pulling it apart publicly and finding Audi components, landed at the worst possible moment for a brand already under intense pressure. The people who run streaming platforms are not looking for car shows. They are looking for stories where someone is fighting something bigger than themselves and might lose. Matt's story has everything that formula required. A working-class man from Leicester told no by a billion-dollar corporation who kept going anyway. An underdog narrative with real stakes, real consequences, and real uncertainty about the outcome. That is the kind of story that makes people who have never watched a single car program sit down and stay for an hour. Netflix reportedly moved first. The platform that turned Formula One into mainstream entertainment with Drive to Survive, that made professional darts and professional bowling compelling television, understood immediately what Matt's story represented. The reported offer was significant, running into the tens of millions. That is not what streaming platforms pay for car content. That is what they pay when they believe they have found something that crosses over entirely. Then Amazon entered the conversation, and Amazon did not match the number. According to what has been reported, Amazon's CEO signaled a willingness to outbid Netflix entirely. Think about what that means. The CEO of one of the world's most valuable companies was prepared to go further than a major streaming competitor to secure the rights to a British YouTuber rebuilding cars in a garage. Amazon Prime Video has built a content strategy around reaching people who do not think of themselves as streaming enthusiasts, people who watch because something ended up in front of them and turned out to be genuinely compelling. Matt's story fits that model precisely. It does not require the viewer to understand hypercars. It requires them to believe in someone, to root for an outcome, and to keep watching. There is also the competitive dimension that exists beyond the content itself. When Netflix makes a visible move on something this prominent, Amazon does not simply evaluate the story on its merit. It evaluates the cost of not having it. That calculation is what turns a streaming deal into a bidding war. For Matt, the decision is more complicated than it appears from the outside. A streaming deal, whichever platform it comes from, changes the nature of what he does. Right now, he answers to his audience. 10 million people follow him because they trust him completely, because when something goes wrong on a build, he shows it rather than hiding it. A streaming contract brings a production team, a network, creative oversight, and a version of his story that someone else has partly shaped. That is the trade-off sitting underneath every conversation about Amazon versus Netflix. Meanwhile, the Ferrari is still in the workshop. Matt acquired a wrecked Ferrari 296 GTB through the same salvage auction route that brought him the Bugatti, and Ferrari responded in almost identical fashion. Parts ordered through official channels were blocked. Dealership access was denied. A catch-22 involving a race kit and Ferrari's own inspection requirements created a wall designed to make independent repair essentially impossible. Two of the most exclusive automotive brands in the world, within months of each other, moved to shut down the same man's project. The method differed. The reason was identical. Opening these cars up on camera and showing exactly what is inside makes the mythology those brands sell significantly harder to maintain. And Bugatti, now under new ownership pending regulatory clearance, finds itself carrying the full weight of the last several months as it moves from Porsche to a New York investment consortium. A new owner inheriting a brand whose most recent chapter involves a mechanic from Leicester taking one of their cars apart without permission, finding Audi components inside, and filming the whole thing for 10 million people. Whatever the new ownership intends to do with Bugatti going forward, that is the context they are starting from. Matt is in his garage. There is a car on the lift. The camera is on. Whether Amazon or Netflix or neither ends up telling his story to the world, the story is already being told, one video at a time, exactly the way he has always told it, without permission from anyone.